You have no idea, little mate.
Why would you save me?
Because I'm not letting you die here.
I gave you half a name. I'm Alarik Vane, King of Emberwood.
You're the Lycan King.
The guards stood at both ends of her bridge, and Wren Ashcombe hated them with a purity she hadn't felt since she was 17. 2 on the human side, 2 on the Emberwood side, posted since dawn without so much as a note left on her door. She'd found out from Barham, who'd found out from the substitute keeper who'd shown up cheerful and apologetic with a wolf's head seal, and her own ledger tucked under his arm like a parcel being delivered to the wrong house. She was still holding the crank bar when Alarik crossed the boundary line that evening. Not fast, not slow, a king's unhurried stride that made the whole bridge feel like it belonged to him. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him even in the cold, close enough to see the muscle working in his jaw, the same restraint she'd once mistaken for calm, and now recognized as a leash held taut in both hands. "You reassigned my ledger," she said. "Wren, you put guards on my crossing. My crossing, Alarik. You canceled my rounds and had Cassian tell me instead of telling me yourself. And I want you to explain to me exactly which part of that you thought I'd thank you for." His eyes were gold even in the dusk, and they didn't leave her face. "There wasn't time to ask. Men came for you at your own door 2 nights past. I couldn't sit with the thought of it happening again while I waited for... There is always time to ask." Her voice didn't rise. She'd learned long ago that the coldest fury was the one held level, the one that didn't need volume to land. "You took the ledger out of my hands. You took my authority over my own bridge and handed it to a stranger because it let you sleep easier. Do you understand what that looks like from where I'm standing? It looks exactly like the wing your father built for your mother. It looks like being decided for by someone who loves me too much to remember I get a vote in my own life." Something crossed his face. Not anger. Nothing so simple. He took a step closer, and the air between them went taut as cable under strain, and she watched him war with something that lived under his skin. Something that wanted, badly, to close the last of the distance, and never let it open again. "You are being possessive," she said. "Exactly the way you swore to me you never would be." He went still, and then, slowly, achingly, he smiled. No triumph in it at all, a smile like a wound finally allowed to show. "Possessive," he repeated low. "You'd call it that. What else would you call it?" His hand rose, hovered at her jaw without quite touching, as though even now he needed her permission to close the last inch. "You have no idea, little mate," he whispered, "what it cost me to leave that rope in your hands at all." 5 weeks earlier, she hadn't known his name. Chapter 1. The river had been rising since noon, and by the time true dark fell, it had swallowed the low stones on either bank and turned the crossing into something that groaned under her boots like it remembered every flood that had ever tried to take it. Wren had grown up reading this water. She knew the difference between a swell that would crest and fall and one that meant business, knew it by the particular hiss the current made against the pilings, by the smell, cold stone and churned silt, that rolled off it before the worst of the rise even arrived. Tonight it had that smell. She'd sent Tam Ruddle's boy home an hour past sundown, waved off 2 of the mill hands who'd come to help hold the counterweight, because she did not let other hands near that rope in weather like this. She hadn't since she was 17. She wasn't about to start because her arms ached. She checked the splice at the center span twice, working half-blind by lantern light, fingers going numb around wet fiber. The counterweight cable groaned, not the good groan, the other one, the one from her worst nights, and she threw her whole weight into the crank until it settled, until the bridge stopped trying to argue with the river and simply held. That was when she saw him. A shape among the boundary stones, the ones that marked the exact center of the crossing where neither territory's law reached, half submerged, dragging itself hand over hand against a current that should have taken a man twice his size. She almost took him for driftwood. Then the moon broke the cloud cover, and his eyes came up and found hers across 60 feet of black water. And they weren't a man's eyes at all. Gold, lit from someplace deeper than the moon could account for. Her whole body went cold in a way the river hadn't managed. Lycan, on the stones. Not on Emberwood soil, not on hers. Caught in the water that belonged to no one. The strip the old accord had drawn to keep both territories honest. She should have rung the warning bell. Every rule her father had drilled into her. Every year of careful neutrality that had kept Corvin's Ford standing, while the border villages further north burned every generation or so, said to ring the bell and let the treaty sort out what happened to a wounded stranger caught between two laws. She looked at the blood sheeting black down his side instead, and she looked at the rescue plank lashed under the near rail for nights exactly like this one, and some old stubborn thing in her. The same thing that had never once let go of a rope without deciding to. Pulled the pin and shoved the plank out across the current before she'd finished thinking it through. "Don't move," she called, voice flat over the water. "You'll pull the whole bank down if you fight the current." He didn't answer. He watched her come the way a trapped animal watches the one thing in the world it hasn't decided is safe yet. And when she got close enough to see the wound properly, a gash along his ribs, deep, edged with something blacker than blood should be, she understood two things at once. He would not survive the night in that water, and whatever had done that to him had wanted it to hold. "I'm invoking rescue passage," she said, mostly to herself, mostly for the ledger she'd have to answer to later. "You are not crossing under your own power. I am pulling you." She got an arm under his shoulder and hauled, and he was heavier than any man had a right to be, and for one terrible second as she dragged him off the boundary stones and onto the first plank of human-side decking, she felt something enormous and coiled go through him. Not a growl, not quite. Something quieter and more dangerous. An animal deciding in the space of one held breath whether the thing touching it was threat or something else entirely. It chose something else. He didn't so much as flinch away from her hands. "Iron," he managed, teeth gritted, as she got him the last few feet onto solid footing. "In the wound. Don't touch it with bare skin." "I wasn't planning to." She got the door of her cottage open with her shoulder, and half carried, half dragged him to the cot in the spare room, and only once he was down did she let herself breathe. "You're conscious. That's something." His eyes tracked her face the whole time she worked. Cataloging her, she'd think later, the way she cataloged a fraying strand, like he was memorizing exactly what would hold and what wouldn't. He didn't thank her. He didn't speak again at all that night, though once, as she cut away the ruined shirt from his side, she heard him say something under his breath that might have been her name, except she hadn't given it to him yet, and she told herself she'd imagined it. Morning came gray and reluctant. The river had dropped 6 inches by the time Baramco let himself in without knocking, the way he'd done since before she could walk, and stood in the doorway of the spare room with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he'd already decided to be worried. Baram was her mother's brother, 20 years gone from soldiering. The only person left alive who'd known her before the flood, took her father and half her softness with him. He didn't fuss over her. He never had. He looked at the man on the cot the way he looked at everything, for the danger in it first, the rest of it second. "That's Lycan work in his side," he said, crouching to turn over the trap tooth he'd pulled from the wound with a cloth wrapped twice around his hand. Tallowed iron. Forged, not scavenged. Somebody wanted this exact wound on this exact kind of creature. He held it up, and she saw the mark stamped into the tang, a hammer inside a broken ring. "I've seen that mark before, wrong side of a border skirmish years back, before I hung up my sword. Men who wear it don't believe in asking for what they think they can take." "You know who said it?" "I know the ideology, not yet the hand." He straightened, knees complaining the way they'd started to lately. "Iron does more than cut, girl. Blocks the healing. Blocks the shift. From what the old soldiers used to say, blocks a good deal of what a Lycan can sense too. Scent, distance, all of it, muddied to nothing while it's in the wound. She thought about the sound he'd made when she touched him. Not threat. Something else. She filed that thought the way she filed everything dangerous. Quietly, to be examined later, alone. She brought broth up at midday. He'd dragged himself half upright against the wall by then, jaw locked with the effort, arms trembling under weight they should have carried easily. And when he reached for the bowl and his hand shook too badly to bring it to his mouth without spilling it down his own chest, she didn't ask permission. She took the bowl back, sat on the edge of the cot, and held it steady while he drank, matter of fact, the way she'd have done for anyone too weak to manage it themselves. "You don't have to do that," he said, voice rough with gravel and embarrassment both. "I know." She didn't look away from the bowl. "You'll spill it otherwise, and I'm not scrubbing broth out of good linen twice in 1 week." Something that wasn't quite a laugh moved through his chest. His eyes, when she finally met them, were steadier than they had any right to be for a man who couldn't hold a spoon. "You're not afraid of me," he said. Not quite a question. Should I be? Most humans would be. I'm not currently at my most reassuring. Most humans didn't grow up on a bridge that eats a man a decade if you don't respect it. She set the empty bowl aside. "I've been afraid of worse than you and lived to complain about it." "I doubt that." But his mouth curved, small, involuntary. "You've got a name?" "Wren. Wren Ashcombe. Warden of this crossing, since you're technically trespassing on the only patch of it that answers to me. Rescue clause," he said. "I know the wording. My debt, not my trespass." "You know the treaty." "I know it very well." Something flickered behind his eyes, there and gone. "Better than most who've crossed it." "You've got a name too, I assume." A pause long enough that she almost thought he'd let the question sit unanswered. "Rick. That's half a name. It's the half you're getting today." But the ghost of a smile stayed, and his gaze didn't leave her face the way a man's does when he's simply grateful. It stayed the way hers did on a strand of fraying cable, assessing, careful, like he was trying to work out exactly how much weight she could hold before something in her gave. She didn't sleep much that night. Some of it was worry over the fever that came and went in him like weather. Some of it, she admitted to no one, was the strange discomfort of another person's breathing, filling a room that had been silent for 7 years. By the second night, his fever had broken, and his color had come back wrong fast, faster than any healing she'd ever witnessed, and Barham muttered something about Lycan blood the way you'd mutter about a storm clearing early. Before dawn on the third day, she woke to an empty cot and a window unlatched from the inside, though the leg beneath that wound should not have carried him 3 steps, let alone out into the dark. On the sill sat one old coin, silver, stamped with a wolf's head ringed in river reeds. Beneath it, weighted down, lay the broken length of tallowed iron that had very nearly killed him. No note. Only proof of a debt marked owed in a currency she did not yet know how to read, and the unsettling, unwelcome discovery that the empty room bothered her a great deal more than the crowded one had. Chapter 2. She was 24 years old, and some autumns the memory came back exact enough to taste. She had been 17 the night the river rose the way it only did once a decade, the night her father let his new hire check the second knot on the counterweight because his knee had been aching all that week, and the boy had asked, so earnestly, to be trusted with something real. One kindness. One trust extended on the single night in 10 years it mattered most. Wren had been holding the lantern when the cable let go, had heard her father's shout cut off mid-word, had stood on the bank with fire in her hands and nothing in her arms to pull him back with. She had decided, in the space of that one night, that she would never again let a knot on that bridge belong to hands that weren't her own. She had held it alone for 7 years. She had slept lighter on flood nights than any other, had checked every splice twice, had told no living soul that the real reason she couldn't sleep the night Rick vanished wasn't fear of what he might be. It was that she had let someone else's hands near hers for 3 whole days, and nothing had broken because of it. 5 days after the coin appeared, A rider hailed her from the Emberwood bank, dark-eyed, compact, watchful in the particular way of a man whose entire profession was noticing danger before it finished forming. Warden of the Ford. His voice carried the flat, correct cadence of a diplomat used to being obeyed. I bring word from the court of Emberwood. I am Cassian Marrow, second to the king. He requests formal passage tomorrow at first light, under the terms of the accord, to speak with the elders of Corvin's Ford regarding the harvest failures on our side of the water. The king, she repeated. Alarik Vane. Cassian's gaze sharpened, cataloging her reaction the way she imagined he cataloged everything. You seem unsurprised. I'm never surprised by kings wanting something from a bridge. She kept her face even, though her mind had gone straight to dark hair silvered at one temple, a jaw that stayed clenched even asleep, a voice that chose its words like they cost something. Rick. Tell him the toll for a sovereign crossing hasn't changed since his grandfather's day. I'll relay that. Cassian's eyes flicked briefly, to the coin she hadn't quite managed to put away, half visible on the shelf behind her, and something in his expression sharpened further. That's an old royal minting, not common currency. Found it on my step. Didn't ask its opinion on where it came from. Of course. A dry note entered his voice, the first crack of humor in all that formality. Half a name, was it? I understand the king left rather abruptly a few nights past. She hadn't told him that. She hadn't told anyone that. Cassian's mouth curved just enough to confirm he'd heard the phrase from Alarik himself, which meant Alarik had said it aloud to his own second, which meant whatever had passed between them in that spare room had mattered enough to repeat. Tell your king, she said, recovering, that the warden remembers exactly how much he already owes. I'll tell him that too. Cassian inclined his head, something like respect settling into the watchfulness. Until tomorrow, warden. That night, Bahram found her scrubbing a porch rail that didn't need it, the way people scrub things when their hands need somewhere to put a feeling they haven't named. 2 failed harvests, he said without preamble, settling onto the step, old knees complaining. Blighted water above the falls. Game thinned past what even a hard winter usually takes. Emberwood spent what little coin it has, buying grain at prices that'll beggar them by spring. He turned the last shard of iron over in his scarred hand. Neither of them had managed to throw it away. And some in that court think their king's too soft for asking instead of taking. Word from the border villages says a faction wants him replaced with someone willing to solve hunger with a sword instead of a treaty. You think that's who set the trap. I think somebody wanted a wolf caught bleeding on our side of this river, so it'd look like humans started something Emberwood would be within its rights to finish. His eyes found hers, steady, testing the way they'd tested her decisions since she was a girl. Which makes you the woman who pulled their king out of that trap before his own people even knew he was missing. That's not nothing, Wren. She said nothing to that. She'd already understood it, the same way she understood a fraying cable before anyone else noticed the strain. Quietly, and with the sense that whatever came next would not be simple. He crossed at first light exactly as promised. 4 guards behind him, Cassian at his shoulder, and he did not set foot on the boards until she'd given the formal signal, though his stride said plainly he'd have walked the whole river on foot if she'd asked him to. No crown. He didn't need one. He wore the kind of stillness that made every plank of that bridge feel like it already belonged to him, right up until he stopped in front of her and inclined his head, a formality kings did not typically owe bridge keepers. Wren Ashcombe. You look considerably better than the last time I saw you, Your Majesty. You have a gift for understatement. Something warmed at the corner of his mouth. Brief, private, meant only for her. I believe I owe you a formal debt of the crown, along with several informal ones I've been considering how to repay. You could start with the rest of your name. Alarik. He said it plainly, watching her the way she'd watched him that first night. Not with admiration, with attention, like he was measuring how she'd take it. Rick is the half you were given because I hadn't decided yet whether I trusted you with the whole of it. I find I no longer have that concern." Behind him, Cassian cleared his throat with the patience of a man who had heard his king say unwise things in front of an audience before, and had learned to simply wait it out. The elders were already gathering on the near bank, faces uncertain, Prue Calder's arms already crossed in anticipation of an argument she hadn't yet heard. But for one held breath, standing on her own crossing in the cold morning light, Wren understood that whatever had begun in that spare room hadn't ended the moment he climbed out her window. "The debt isn't settled," she said, quieter, for him alone. "I decide when a toll's been paid in full. Not you. I wouldn't dream of deciding that for you." His eyes held hers a moment longer than strictly diplomatic. "It's one of several things about you I'm learning not to decide." She didn't have an answer for that. She didn't try to find one. She only turned and led them both toward the council chamber, aware, for the first time in 7 years, that whatever waited inside those doors, she would not be facing it entirely alone. Chapter 3. The council met in the long room above the millers, elders on one side of a scarred table, Alarik on the other, Cassian at his shoulder, and Wren standing at the door in her warden's coat, because tradition demanded the keeper of the crossing witness anything decided at it. Alarik laid out the failed seasons plainly, without a single flourish. Blighted spring water above the falls, game thinned past what even the hardest winter usually took, stores already spent on grain, bought at prices that would beggar Emberwood by spring, if nothing changed. "I am not here to ask for charity. I am here to renegotiate the toll schedule, so grain crosses at a rate my people can survive paying, in exchange for labor yours needs, road work, river work, whatever your elders judge fair. I would rather owe you a debt in daylight than take what I need in the dark." Prue Calder, sharp-boned and unconvinced, did not soften. And what happens the season after this one, when the toll's already been cut, and Emberwood's harvest still fails? Do we cut it again? Where does the line sit before we're feeding a kingdom on human labor for nothing in return? "The labor is the return," Alarik said. "River clearing, road repair, engineering my people have and yours currently lack. If the arrangement fails to hold, it ends. I am not asking you to trust me forever. I am asking for 1 season to prove it can work." 1 season of cheaper grain also means more traffic on this crossing, Prue pressed. "More Lycans passing through, more chance for exactly the kind of incident that got a king nearly killed on our side of the water already." It was Wren who answered that, before she'd decided to speak at all. "Then we cap the daily crossings and I hold the ledger on it myself, same as I hold everything else that comes through here. If the numbers climb past what I judge safe, the terms revisit. That's not charity for either side. That's the job I already do." Silence settled over the table. Alarik's eyes found hers, something like surprise and something warmer moving through them at once, and he did not claim her proposal as his own, only nodded once, plainly in support of it. "The warden's terms," he said, "are more sound than mine were. I'll stand behind them." It took another hour of arguing details, grain weights, labor schedules, the specific stretch of road Emberwood would repair first, before the council granted the new terms, grudging but resolved. Wren watched Alarik's hand stay flat and still on the table through the worst of it, a man holding something down by sheer discipline, his eyes finding her every time the talk turned dangerous, checking briefly that she hadn't moved. Afterward, on the walk back toward the crossing, Cassian fell into step beside her while Alarik spoke with 2 of the elders a few paces back. "You handled Prue Calder better than most of our own council manages," Cassian observed. "She's buried 3 husbands and outlived every man who underestimated her. He's fortunate you didn't let him charm his way past her objections." He wasn't trying to charm anyone. He was telling the truth badly, which is worse strategy but better character. Cassian's mouth twitched, dry amusement breaking through the watchfulness. "That's a fair read of him. I've served at his side 11 years. He'd rather lose an argument honestly than win one by omission. It's cost him support among certain factions who'd prefer a king who simply takes what he wants. Torvald Crane's faction. Something shifted in Cassian's face. Not surprised that she knew the name, but reassessment of how much she'd already worked out. You've been listening. I listen to everyone who crosses my bridge. It's how I've kept it standing. The attack came that same night, before the council's ink had dried. She heard the horses before she heard the shouting. 6 riders coming hard along the human side road, and beneath the drumming hooves, low and rhythmic, a sound she'd never mistake again. The half-throated growl of something choosing, mid-stride, to run on 2 legs instead of 4. Wren was on the deck with the crank bar before she'd finished deciding to move. Alarik reached the boundary line from the Emberwood side at the same instant, planted himself exactly on his own side of it. The treaty observed even now, even with riders bearing down, and loosed something that wasn't words at all, a command aimed straight at the oncoming riders, pure authority cutting through the dark. 4 scattered instantly, some old instinct in their blood answering before their minds caught up. The 5th, broader, harder-eyed, moving with the particular contempt of a man who'd already decided obedience was beneath him, only slowed, shook the command off within 2 strides and kept coming. He's one of Crane's own, Cassian shouted, already moving to cut the man off. Command doesn't hold on the strong ones close up. Not from this distance, not for long! The man reached the boards before Cassian could close the gap. Wren swung the crank bar with both splicing, calloused hands, caught him hard across the temple, and when he staggered, shoved him toward the loose plank she knew better than her own name. The bridge finished what her arm had started, and he went into the current with a shout that cut off into cold, panicked swimming, alive, cursing, but alive. Silence rang louder than the fighting had. Alarik crossed the boundary line the instant the threat cleared, not a breath before, and stopped short of touching her, hands hovering, gaze raking her for injury. You're bleeding. His, not mine. She looked down at the dark stain on her sleeve, then up at him. You waited for the line even with riders coming at me. It means something, he said, low, rough. If it stops meaning something the first moment I'm frightened for you, it never meant anything at all. His hand finally closed around her wrist. Not the stained sleeve, just the pulse point. Thumb pressing there, like he needed to feel something steady with his own skin. Your heart is racing. So's yours. I can feel it through your hand. Something flickered across his face, quick and startled, like she'd caught him at something he hadn't meant to reveal. He didn't explain it. Neither of them, that night, had the words for what was beginning to happen between 2 heartbeats that shouldn't have had any business finding each other's rhythm at all. Barham found the smith's mark stitched into the captured rider's collar the next morning. A hammer inside a broken ring. The same mark from the trap tooth, undeniable now. Torvald's men had come not merely to disrupt the new terms, but to recover evidence of their own failed trap before the elders could examine it further. They hadn't managed it. And Wren, turning the proof over in her palm, understood plainly that whatever this was becoming, it was no longer only about grain. Chapter 4. He started finding reasons to cross that had less and less to do with border business, and it took her 4 visits to realize he'd learned her tea schedule down to the quarter hour, simply by watching which window her kettle steamed from. You could invent better excuses, she told him, amused despite herself, watching him hold a lantern at the exact angle she'd shown him, rather than trust his own considerable strength to fix the wick himself. Reviewing the toll ledger 3 days running is not subtle. I wasn't aiming for subtle. He didn't look up from the lantern. Careful, deliberate. I'm attempting to learn how to be useful to you without deciding for you what useful looks like. It's a skill I confess I was raised badly for. What does that mean? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. The same silence she'd started to recognize as the shape his honesty took before it arrived. My father believed love and command were the same instrument. My mother wanted to travel, to train, to sit in his council and speak for herself. He forbade all of it, dressed as protection. When trouble came, a border raid, when I was a boy, he confined her to a warded wing rather than let her fight or run, because he'd never once taught her a way to do either. His jaw tightened. The wing was breached in an attack he hadn't predicted. She had nowhere to go and no way to defend herself, because he'd spent a marriage making certain she'd never need to. I was 8. I believed, for longer than I'm proud of, that what he'd done to her was devotion. That's not devotion. Wren's voice came out rougher than she intended. That's a cage with better manners. Something in him went very still. I am trying very hard, he said finally, not to build that cage around anyone I care for. I'd like you to tell me plainly the moment I start. I will, she said, and meant it more than she understood yet. 3 weeks in, on a morning cold enough to fog her breath over the ledger, she heard whistling drifting off-key across the water. Unpracticed, badly pitched, and unmistakably the same 7 notes her father used to whistle every dawn while checking the counterweight. A tune she'd told no one, ever, except once, in the dark of that first night, to a wounded stranger she'd assumed hadn't truly been listening. He'd heard every note of it. She stood frozen at the rail for a long moment, throat working, something between grief and fury, and a terrible tenderness all fighting for the same space in her chest. You're terrible at that, she managed finally. I've had considerably less practice than your father, I imagine. His mouth curved, careful, watching her face for whatever damage the gift might have done. I only heard it once. I wanted to be sure I hadn't imagined how much it meant to you. You didn't imagine it. She had to look at the water instead of him. Nobody's whistled that in 7 years. Then I'm glad to be the fool who tried badly to be the second. She told him about her father that evening. Not everything. Not the lantern or the knot, or the 17-year-old girl who'd stood frozen on the bank, but enough. He listened with his whole weathered attention, and offered nothing, fixed nothing, only stayed. And something in that stillness felt more generous than any comfort he might have tried to build for her instead. She overheard the conversation with Cassian 3 nights later, half by accident, latching her shutter above the spot where they'd stopped to talk in low voices they hadn't accounted for carrying. You're tracking her heartbeat from here, Cassian said. You went still the moment she stepped outside a moment ago. That isn't ordinary attentiveness, Alarik, and you know it isn't. I don't know anything for certain. There was iron in the wound the night we met. I can't be sure what's real recognition and what's a reaction to nearly dying. You can be sure. You're simply not ready to say the word aloud. A pause. Waited. Tell her before the bond decides to speak for you instead. Alarik didn't answer that. Wren, above them, pretended for both their sakes that she hadn't heard a single word of it, though she lay awake long after, turning the shape of what she'd overheard like a coin she didn't yet know how to spend. The storm came at the end of that week, harder and faster than the almanac allowed for, and the counterweight cable groaned the exact wrong groan past midnight, the one from her worst memory, precise down to the pitch. She was out on the deck in her nightclothes and boots before she'd finished waking. Alarik reached her within minutes, drawn by the storm or by some instinct neither of them named, and instead of taking the rope from her hands the way every old fear in her braced for, he simply planted himself at her shoulder and asked, "Where do you need me?" "Here. Pull when I pull. Not before." He matched her exactly, hand for hand, for 3 hours while the storm did its worst. Soaked through, arms burning, saying almost nothing because the work said what needed saying. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, in the lull between one surge and the next, she found herself talking anyway. The whole story this time. The lantern. The boy who'd checked a knot wrong out of kindness. The 7 years of believing that sharing this rope with anyone meant losing it entirely. "You haven't lost anything tonight," he said, rain running down his jaw, close enough that she felt the words more than heard them. "I'm not taking this from you, Wren. I couldn't if I tried. I only wanted to be here while you held it." Something in her chest that had stayed clenched shut for 7 years came loose the way rope does when it's finally given slack instead of more strain. She didn't say stay. Not yet. Not in words. But she stopped moving her shoulder away from the solid warmth of his, and neither of them needed further translation. They stood there a long moment after the rain finally slowed, close enough that she could feel his breath, close enough that some part of her leaned toward the idea of closing the last of the distance between them. And it was Alarik who stepped back first, careful, deliberate, giving them both room to want it, and not yet take it. "Not like this," he said quietly. "Not exhausted, not in the middle of a storm, when neither of us has slept enough to know our own minds properly. When it happens, I want you to be certain." She should have found that maddening. Instead, it settled something in her, another small proof that whatever this was, it wasn't going to run ahead of her consent. The abduction attempt came the following week, dressed as an accident. A stranger appeared at her door before dawn, urgent, claiming an ailing mother, needing to cross medicine under treaty exception. His story was almost good enough, the right herbs named, the right urgency in his voice. And it was only Bahram's soldier's eye, catching hands too clean and uncalloused for a man who claimed to grind his own medicine, that stopped her from opening the crossing to what turned out to be exactly the trap it was. The man ran the moment Bahram shouted. 2 more of Torvald's riders broke from the tree line to cover his retreat, and only Alarik's border patrol, closer than usual, watching her cottage without her knowledge for days, turned what should have been an abduction into a scattered, bloodless failure. Wren wasn't harmed. Alarik, watching from the boundary line as the last rider vanished into the dark, looked like a man who'd nearly lost the only steady thing left in his chest. It broke something loose in him that the storm hadn't. By morning, guards stood posted at both ends of her bridge without her asking. Her night crossings were cancelled by an order relayed through Cassian instead of spoken to her face. Her own ledger was quietly reassigned to a keeper from the crossing downriver, for the length of the present danger, and she learned all of it secondhand, from Bahram, who'd learned it from the substitute keeper himself. Chapter 5. She was waiting on the bridge when Alarik crossed that evening, and she did not raise her voice, because the coldest fury was always the one held level. "You reassigned my ledger. For your safety, until... You didn't ask me. There wasn't time to... There is always time to ask." Her hands stayed steady on the rail. Her voice did not. "You put guards on my bridge. You canceled my crossings. You moved my own work out from under me, and you did all of it without once putting the question to my face. Do you know what that looks like from where I'm standing? It looks like the wing your father built for your mother. It looks like being decided for by someone who loves me too much to remember I get a vote in my own protection. You are being possessive, Alarik, exactly the way you swore you never would be." He started to answer, some half-formed defense rising in him, and then she watched him catch himself mid-breath, watched the words die before they became one more excuse. He went still instead, and then he smiled. No triumph in it, only something raw finally let show. "Possessive," he repeated. "You'd call it that. What else would you call it?" He crossed the last few feet, close enough that she felt the tremor running under his skin, the leashed and desperate thing he was holding back with both hands. "You have no idea, little mate," he whispered, "what it costs me to leave that rope in your hands at all. Mate." The word landed in her like a struck bell. "My heart doesn't beat right when you're in danger," he said, low, unguarded in a way she'd never heard from him. "It sinks to yours. Has done, I think, since the night you pulled me off those stones. When that man came to your door, I didn't feel fear the way a man fears for someone he cares for. I felt it the way a man feels his own chest stop working. Cassian warned me weeks ago what this was. I didn't tell you, because there was iron in that wound the night we met, and I couldn't be certain what was real recognition, and what was only a reaction to nearly dying. And because I would rather have cut off my own hand than hand you a bond you never chose, in the middle of a war I was trying to keep from your door. That still doesn't give you the right to decide for me. No, he said, immediate, certain, no defense left in it at all. It doesn't. You're right, and I was wrong. Fear isn't consent. Protection without your voice in it is only a prettier cage, and I built you exactly the one thing I swore to you I never would. He drew a breath. The guards stand down tonight, unless you choose to keep them. Your ledger returns to your hand before the hour is out, and I will say, in front of every soldier under my command, and every elder in that hall, that no order concerning this crossing, or concerning you, is given again without your voice in the room. He meant it. That same night, before Cassian, before the guards, before the elders summoned by torchlight, Alarik said exactly that, plainly, without a single excuse folded into it, and placed the ledger back into her hands himself, in front of witnesses from both territories. I overstepped, he said to the assembled hall, voice carrying, steady. I mistook fear for authority. The warden's command over this crossing is not mine to override, not for her safety, not for any reason. If I forget that again, I expect every one of you to remind me. Wren didn't forgive him on the spot. She told him so, plainly, and he accepted it without argument. Over the days that followed, she watched instead of trusting. A suspicious rider approached the crossing, and Alarik, arriving moments after, waited at the boundary line for her signal before so much as speaking. A cable problem arose at the far tower, and he asked, "Where do you need me?" instead of simply climbing to fix it himself. Cassian, restructuring the border patrols, sent a rider to request her authorization before adjusting so much as a single watch rotation. Alarik kept his distance from her cottage in the evenings, close enough to answer if she called, far enough that she understood he was waiting to be invited, rather than assuming he still had the right to simply appear. It was Barham, of all people, who noticed it first. "He's kept every word of it," he said one evening, watching Alarik cross back toward Emberwood without once looking to see if she was watching him go. "That's not nothing, girl. Most men say sorry and wait for you to forget." He's saying it with his feet. The final attack came a week later, and this time there was no pretense of accident in it at all. Cassian's intelligence placed Torvald's remaining loyalists moving along the old smuggler's ford downriver, a shallow crossing, known only during low water, used for years to slip contraband, and now, clearly, men, past the legal bridge entirely. Wren spent 2 days walking the span with Bahram and a pair of Emberwood engineers, testing the new tension points, planning exactly where the center span could be dropped fastest, and where it would do the least harm to whoever stood on it when it fell. "Torvald wants a war he can call defense," she told Alarik, laying it out plainly the night before. "He'll come at the bridge itself, publicly, where witnesses from both sides can see it and believe whatever story he tells first. We don't give him that story. We give them the true one, in front of everyone, before he can shape it." "Tell me my part," he said, and she noted, with something that felt dangerously close to trust, that he asked, rather than assumed. "You hold the boundary line. You don't cross it first, no matter what he says to bait you. Let him be the one who breaks the treaty in front of every witness we've gathered. Cassian closes the ford behind them so there's no clean retreat. I drop the span the instant the first rider's weight hits it. Not before, or we lose the ones still trying to talk sense into themselves." Torvald came at moonless dark with a dozen riders, exactly as Cassian had predicted, and he stopped at the boundary line only long enough to shout across it, loud enough for the human elders gathered at Prue's insistence to hear every word. "Your king feeds you scraps of a treaty while my people starve," he called toward the human bank. "Ask him how many of you he'd have you starve to keep his own hands clean of an honest war." "Ask him," Alarik answered, voice carrying, cold and level. How many of his own people he poisoned above the falls to manufacture the hunger he's using to justify tonight. That landed. Wren saw it land, saw the hesitation ripple through riders who hadn't known, who'd followed Torvald on the strength of a famine he'd engineered himself. Torvald surged forward anyway, and the moment his horse's weight struck the center span, Wren pulled the pin. The bridge dropped between one heartbeat and the next. 3 horses shied hard into the shallows, riders thrown but unharmed, and the rest scattered under torchlight carried by elders and Emberwood counselors alike, come to witness rather than only to fight. Cassian closed the ford behind them within minutes. Torvald himself was pulled, soaked and raging, from the shallows by his own countrymen, and it was the smith's mark and the captured rider's testimony, laid before the full council of both territories before the night was through, that stripped him of rank, allies, and any claim to have spoken for Emberwood at all. You'd choose a human woman's bridge over your own people's survival, Torvald spat, held fast, staring at Alarik with the particular hatred of a man who'd already lost. I'd choose the truth over a war built on a lie, Alarik answered. Trusting her prevented the exact war you engineered. That is not weakness, Torvald. That is the only kind of strength that doesn't cost innocent lives to prove itself. No one died on the bridge that night. Torvald was remanded to his own council for judgment, stripped of everything he'd built his following on, and Wren, standing on the span she'd just dropped and would spend the next month rebuilding, understood that the threat which had shadowed every day since she pulled a bleeding stranger off the boundary stones was, at last, closed. Chapter 6. They spent the following month rebuilding the span together. New timber, new cable, a counterweight system Wren redesigned herself, raised into place by hands that waited, every single time, for her nod before they pulled. Human and Emberwood workers eyed each other warily at first. By the second week, they were trading complaints about splinters in a shared, grudging camaraderie that made Wren's chest ache in a way she didn't examine too closely. Alarik worked alongside them without once demanding deference, took correction from her in front of his own men without flinching, and Barham, of all people, started leaving a second mug of tea out on the mornings Alarik arrived early to help with the tower. Word came from upriver within weeks. The blight had been sabotage after all. A slow poison bled deliberately into the spring by Torvald's own loyalists to manufacture the famine he'd meant to blame on human greed. Emberwood engineers and human river workers cleared the source together under the new terms, and though the water didn't run fully clean overnight, the first clear flow reached the lower falls by the time the ground had softened enough for planting. Through all of it, Alarik kept his distance in the evenings, close enough to answer if called, far enough not to presume. It cost him. She could see that plainly, in the careful way he held himself back from her, in the restraint that visibly pained him even as he maintained it. But he never once let the cost turn into pressure on her to close the distance faster than she was ready to. She realized, somewhere in the third week, that he had kept every promise without exception. That he asked even when he clearly already suspected her answer. That he'd respected her refusals as readily as her consent, every single time, without sulking, without repeating the request in a different shape to see if it landed better the second time. On the evening the new span was finished, she walked its whole length alone, unbidden, and crossed the boundary line into Emberwood, the first Ashcombe in 7 generations to do so of her own free will, treaty be damned, because she wanted to, not because any law required it. Alarik was waiting on the far side. He didn't step forward. He let her finish the choice herself, the whole length of it, until she stood close enough to see the hope he wasn't quite hiding. I came to answer something, she said, that you asked me without knowing you were asking it. Whether this rope could belong to more than one set of hands without either of us losing anything. She held hers out, calloused, sure. I've decided it can. What do you want now? He asked, quiet, careful not to assume the answer. I want to find out what happens next. On my terms, same as always. A breath. And I want you to stop being careful with me. She closed the last of the distance herself, She kissed him first, not the pole deciding anything for her. Only her own 2 hands closing around a certainty she'd built slowly, deliberately, the way the best knots always held. He went still under it for one full breath, as though even now he needed to be sure it was truly offered. And then his hand came up careful against her jaw, and she felt, beneath her own palm flattened against his chest, the exact moment his heart stopped straining against its own leash and simply settled into hers. They courted properly after that, in the plain daylight way neither of them had allowed themselves before. Walks along the finished span, meals at her table and his, conversations about what a life stitched between 2 territories might actually require. It was weeks before either of them raised the word binding aloud, and when Alarik finally did, he asked it as a question and nothing more, leaving the whole shape of her answer entirely hers to give. The ceremony took place on the boundary line itself, half on each bank, at her insistence. A cord of her hair and his worked between their own 4 hands rather than any priests. Barum stood witness for the human side. Cassian stood witness for Emberwood. "I choose this," Wren said, with my eyes open, holding nothing back and losing nothing by it. "I choose this," Alarik answered, "and I choose to ask you every day of it, before I decide a single thing on your behalf." The cord drew snug between their wrists and held, simple and unspectacular, the way the best knots always did. Afterward, foreheads pressed together, he laughed low against her hair, an unguarded sound she'd never heard from him before. "My wolf has been unbearable for weeks," he admitted, "wanting to guard your door, wanting to know every hand that so much as touches this bridge. I've been ferociously possessive the entire time, little mate, and said not a word of it. You've hidden it well. I've been earning the right to say it instead of act on it." His hand found hers, steady. "That's the whole of what I've learned. Not to stop wanting to protect you, only to stop mistaking the wanting for permission." Before the joint council of both territories, he named her Warden of the Accord in more than title, the first authority the treaty had ever recognized as binding in both courts at once, her voice equal to his in matters of trade, crossing law, and the crossing's endless small emergencies. He kept his throne in Emberwood. A second seat of governance rose near the bridge itself, so a king known now for asking instead of taking could be found most days within easy reach of the one rope in either territory he trusted no one else to teach him how to hold. Spring came late, but it came clean. The first healthy crop in 3 years stood green across fields that had been dust the autumn before. Not yet a harvest, only a promise finally allowed to take root. On a morning warm enough to work bareheaded, Wren knelt to check a splice she'd tied herself months earlier and found a second set of careful, deliberate hands already resting on the cable beside hers, waiting for her nod before he pulled. Somewhere above the water, badly, happily, off-key, a king was whistling her father's tune, and for the first time in 7 years, she let herself hum the second half of it back, no longer needing to hold anything alone to know at last that it was still hers. If you found yourself rooting for a woman who never once needed saving to be worth loving fiercely, tell me which moment did it for you. There's always another bridge worth finding. Stay close for the next one.